Ema stood in his warehouse, surrounded by stacks of expensive goods. His workers moved around him, loading boxes into a truck. The order was worth millions of naira, and Ema watched every move with sharp eyes. Nothing escaped his attention when it came to business. His phone rang. Ema glanced at it and saw his sister-in-law Inky was calling. He almost didn't answer, but finally picked up. Ema, Inky's voice was shaking. You must come quickly. Okuchi is in labor. There are complications. Ema frowned. So, women give birth every day. The doctor says she needs emergency surgery. Inky explained, her words coming fast. There's a problem. Without a C-section, both Okuchi and the baby could die. A bitter laugh escaped Ema's lips. His workers glanced at him, then quickly looked away. What's wrong with you people? Ema snapped into the phone. Why can't she push like every other woman? Is she that lazy that she wants the easy way out? Inky gasped. Ema, it's not about that. There are complications. This isn't about being lazy. It's about saving her life. The doctor says she needs this or her life, and the babies would be at risk. Tell her to push, Ema said coldly. Women have been doing this forever. It's not that difficult. I don't have time for all this nonsense. He ended the call abruptly and turned back to his workers. In his mind, nothing was more important than his business. Men were created to work and provide. Women were created to bear babies. His wife was seeking the easy way out to have their first child. What kind of laziness was that? Ema buried himself in his work, pushing away any thoughts of his wife or unborn child. At the hospital, Okuchi lay on a bed, pale and exhausted. Her body was worn down from hours of painful labor. Her twin sister Inky sat beside her, holding her hand tightly. Their mother stood nearby, her face lined with worry. What did he say? Okuchi whispered, hope in her eyes. Inky couldn't bring herself to repeat Ema's cruel words. He's busy with work, she said finally. The doctor entered the room, his face serious. We can't wait any longer, he said. We need to perform the surgery now. Do we have consent? Inky looked at her twin sister's pale face, then at the doctor. She nodded firmly. Do whatever it takes to save my sister and the baby. As the medical team wheeled Okuchi toward the operating room, Inky couldn't stop thinking about Ema's words. How could he be so heartless? How could business matter more than his wife's life? She made up her mind to focus on Okuchi for now, but deep down, she knew she would have words for Ema when the time came. The hours dragged by, each minute feeling like an eternity. Inky and her mother waited, holding each other, praying silently. Finally, the surgeon appeared, a reassuring smile on his face. The surgery was a success, he announced. Okuchi has given birth to a beautiful baby girl. Mother and child are both stable. Tears of joy and relief flooded down Inky's and her mother's faces as they embraced. They had a new family member to love, a precious baby girl who had fought to enter this world. But their joy was short-lived. The hospital doors burst open, and Ema stormed in, his face twisted with anger. He hadn't come to celebrate the birth of his daughter or check on his wife. He had come to complain. What is all this nonsense? He demanded, not even glancing toward the nursery where his newborn daughter lay. I told you people no surgery. How dare you go against my instructions? Inky, who was holding the sleeping newborn, looked up at him with disbelief. Ema, are you even listening to yourself? This wasn't about you. It was about saving Okuchi's life. The doctor says she couldn't have survived without surgery. Ema's anger only deepened. Then you should pay for it yourselves. I didn't ask for any of this, and I won't pay a single dime. She could have tried harder. Okuchi's mother, who had been silent until now, stood up, her eyes flashing with anger. Ema, my daughter fought for hours. She was in pain, struggling to bring your child into this world. And while she was fighting for her life, you were busy with your business. Is money more important to you than your family? Business is what keeps this family afloat. Emma shot back. If you all think you know better, then pay for this nonsense yourselves. I won't spend my hard-earned money on someone who's so weak and spineless. At 24, she's already opting for surgery when my own mother gave birth to me at 38 without any surgery. The entire hospital fell silent, shocked to hear a man speak this way about his wife who had just risked her life to deliver their child. After a long pause, Ema spoke again, his voice cold. Take your daughter back with you. In fact, I'm done with all of this nonsense. I don't need a wife who can't even do her duty as a woman. With those cruel words, Ema walked out of the hospital. He didn't look back. He didn't ask to see his daughter. He didn't care to see his wife Okuchi, who was still recovering from her surgery. Everyone in the hospital stared after him, unable to believe what they had just witnessed. How could a man abandon his wife and newborn child at their most vulnerable moment? No one had an answer to that question. In the quiet hospital room, Inky held her tiny niece closer, as if to shield her from the harshness of her father's rejection. The baby slept peacefully, unaware that her life was beginning with her father's abandonment. The hospital room felt colder after Ema left. Inky sat by the nursery window, the newborn baby girl cradled in her arms. The tiny chest rose and fell with each breath, and Inky marveled at how something so small could be so perfect. Her niece had her mother's round face and delicate nose. She was beautiful, even if her father couldn't see it. How are we going to pay for all this? Okuchi's mother whispered, her voice breaking the silence. She stood by the window, staring out at nothing in particular. The joy of having a granddaughter was overshadowed by the weight of their new reality. Ymir abandoned us. We have no money. Inky looked down at the sleeping baby. I don't know, she admitted, but we'll figure it out together. Okuchi needs us to be strong now. When Okuchi woke from the anesthesia, her first question was about her baby. Her voice was weak, her eyes searching the room. Where is she? Is she okay? Inky brought the baby to her. She's perfect, she said, placing the child in her sister's arms. Tears welled up in Okuchi's eyes as she gazed at her daughter for the first time. She's so beautiful, she whispered, touching the baby's cheek with her finger. Where's Ema? Okuchi asked, looking toward the door. Has he seen her? Inky and her mother exchanged a look. Okuchi noticed, and her smile faded. What's wrong? What happened? She asked. Inky took a deep breath. Okuchi, Ema was here, but she couldn't finish. How could she tell her twin sister, who had just given birth, that her husband had rejected both her and their child? But Okuchi knew. She could read it in her sister's face. He's angry about the surgery, isn't he? Inky nodded slowly. He said some things. Terrible things. He won't pay for the hospital bill. He said we should take the baby home with us. Okuchi's face crumpled, but she held her daughter tighter. He'll change his mind when he sees her, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. The next morning, a doctor came to check on Okuchi and the baby. After examining them both, he turned to the family with a serious expression. I need to discuss the hospital bill, he said. The emergency C-section, medication, and care for both mother and child comes to 300,000 naira. Inky felt the blood drain from her face. 300,000 naira? The doctor nodded. It must be paid before discharge. I understand this is difficult, but hospital policy is clear. We don't have that kind of money, Okuchi's mother said, her voice trembling. My daughter's husband has abandoned her. Please, can you give us more time? The doctor's face remained impassive. I'm sorry. The hospital is not a charitable organization. Without payment, we cannot release the patient or the baby. If the bill remains unpaid, we may need to involve the authorities. After he left, the three women sat in silence. 300,000 naira might as well have been 3 million. It was an impossible sum. Inky paced the small room, thinking hard. She was part of a women's contribution group, where each month they all put money together, and one woman would take the full amount. The money was kept with Inky as the treasurer. It wasn't hers to use, but right now, it was their only option. I know how to pay the bill, she said finally. Her mother looked up. Ow. The women's contribution money, Inky said. I have it. We can use it to pay the hospital, then find a way to replace it before anyone knows. That's stealing. Her mother gasped. It's borrowing. Inky insisted. We have no choice. We can't stay here forever, and they won't let us leave without paying. Okuchi shook her head weakly from the bed. Inky, you can't. Those women worked hard for that money. If they find out, they won't find out, Inky said with more confidence than she felt. I'll replace it somehow. Right now, we need to get you and the baby home where you can recover properly. That afternoon, Inky paid the hospital bill with the women's contribution money. She felt terrible doing it, but seeing her sister and niece discharged made it worthwhile. Somehow, they would make things right. At home, Okuchi rested in her childhood bed, her daughter sleeping beside her. She had expected to bring her baby home to the house she shared with Emma, not to her mother's small home. But here they were. Inky watched over them both, her heart heavy with worry. Using the women's money had solved one problem, but created another. How would they replace it? And what would happen when the women found out? That evening, as Okuchi nursed her baby in the dim light of the bedroom, she made a decision. We need to name her, she said softly. What will you call her? Inky asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. Okuchi looked down at her daughter's peaceful face. Despite everything that had happened, despite Ima's rejection, this child was a blessing. Ifunanya, Okuchi said. It means love. Ifunanya, Inky repeated, smiling. It's perfect. For a brief moment, the room felt warmer, filled with hope. Then reality came crashing back when they heard a knock at the door. Inky went to answer it and found Ima's friend standing outside. I came to tell you, he said hesitantly. Ima has packed up and left his house. He told everyone Okuchi is trying to kill him with witchcraft. He's blaming her for his warehouse burning down last night. The news hit Inky like a blow. Ima wasn't just abandoning them. He was actively spreading lies about her sister. From inside, she could hear baby Ifunanya beginning to cry, as if sensing the new trouble that had just arrived at their door. The news of Ima's warehouse fire spread through the town like wildfire. People whispered that it had happened the very night his daughter was born, and many wondered if it was more than coincidence. Ima had made sure everyone heard his side of the story first, that his wife was a witch who had cursed his business out of spite. Inky couldn't believe her ears when neighbors started avoiding them in the market. How can people believe such nonsense? She asked her mother as they walked home with barely enough food for the day. Baby Ifunanya was now a week old, and Okuchi was still recovering from her surgery, too weak to leave the house. People love bad news, her mother replied bitterly, and Ima has money and influence. Of course they believe him. When they returned home, they found Okuchi sitting up in bed, her eyes red from crying. I heard what people are saying about me, she whispered. How could Ima do this? I gave him nothing but love. I almost died bringing our child into this world. Inky sat beside her twin sister and took her hand. None of it is true, and deep down, people know that. Focus on getting better and taking care of Ifunanya. That's all that matters now. But trouble was brewing elsewhere. The women's contribution group had called an emergency meeting. Someone had heard that Inky's family had suddenly paid a large hospital bill, and suspicions were rising. Inky knew it was only a matter of time before they came asking questions. That evening, Inky decided she needed to find Ima. Perhaps if she confronted him, made him see reason, he would take responsibility for his family. She left Okuchi and the baby with their mother and set out for Ima's house. The sight that greeted her made her blood run cold. The once beautiful home where her sister had lived with Ima stood empty, the front door hanging open. Inside, Inky found nothing but Okuchi's belongings scattered across the floor, as if they had been thrown there in anger. "He's really gone," she whispered to the empty room. "He's abandoned everything." A neighbor saw her and came over. "Are you looking for Ima?" the woman asked cautiously. Inky nodded. "He moved out 3 days ago," the woman said. "Took only his personal things and left. Said he was starting fresh elsewhere." "Did he say where he was going?" Inky asked. The woman shook her head. "No, but he went to his warehouse first. Or what's left of it. Maybe someone there knows something." Inky thanked her and hurried to what remained of Ima's warehouse. The building was now just a blackened shell, still smelling of smoke and burned goods. A few men were sorting through the debris, seeing what could be salvaged. "I'm looking for Ima," Inky said to one of them. "Have you seen him?" The man looked up, his face streaked with soot. "Ima? He hasn't been back since the fire, but he sent word that we should save what we can and contact his business partner." The man paused, studying Inky's face. "You're his sister-in-law, aren't you?" "The twin sister?" Inky nodded. "He told us to stay away from your family," the man said quietly. "Said your sister is a witch who caused this fire because he wouldn't pay for her surgery. Said she wanted to kill him next." Inky felt her chest tighten with anger and disbelief. "That's a lie. My sister has been recovering from childbirth. She's barely strong enough to walk, let alone cast spells or start fires." The man shrugged. "I'm just telling you what he said. He seemed scared, though. Really scared. Said he's leaving town for his own safety." Inky left the warehouse with her mind spinning. Ima wasn't just avoiding his responsibilities. He was actively destroying Okuchi's reputation. And now he had fled, leaving them with nothing but his lies. When she returned home, Inky found her mother sitting outside, her face tight with worry. "What's wrong?" Inky asked. "It's the women," her mother replied. "They're asking about their money. Ma Neka came by today. Said they need the funds by next week for Adana's business startup." Inky's heart sank. "Next week? But we don't have the money yet. I thought we had more time." Her mother shook her head. "There is no more time. And if they discover we used it for the hospital bill." Inside, baby Ifananya began to cry. Okuchi's soft voice could be heard, singing a lullaby to calm her daughter. The sound made Inky's chest ache. Her sister and niece deserved better than this. That night, after Okuchi and the baby had fallen asleep, Inky sat at the table with her mother, trying to think of a solution. "I could find work," Inky suggested, "maybe at the market or as a house help." "In 1 week?" her mother asked. "You won't earn enough. What about selling some of our things?" Her mother gestured around the simple home. "What do we have that's worth 300,000 naira? We've always been poor. Now we're poor and in debt." Inky put her head in her hands. "If only Ima would take responsibility." "Ima is gone," her mother said firmly. "And even if he wasn't, he's shown his true colors. We need to solve this ourselves." The next morning brought Okuchi's best friend, Amaka, to their door. She had just returned from visiting her family in the village and had heard the rumors about Okuchi being a witch. "I couldn't believe what people were saying," Amaka said, embracing Okuchi tightly. "How could anyone think such things about you?" Okuchi, holding Ifananya in her arms, tried to smile but failed. "Ima is telling everyone I tried to kill him, that I caused his warehouse to burn down. He's left town, left me with nothing." Amaka's face darkened with anger. "That coward. After everything you did for him. After bearing his child." As Amaka cradled baby Ifananya, Cooing at the infant's tiny features, Inky pulled her aside. We have another problem, Inky whispered, explaining about the women's contribution money and how they now had to repay it within a week. Amaka's eyes widened. That's serious. Those women will be furious if they find out you used their money. I know, Inky said, her voice shaking. But we had no choice. The hospital wouldn't let Okuchi and the baby leave otherwise. Amaka thought for a moment, then reached into her bag. I just restocked my shop, so I don't have much cash. But take this, she said, handing Inky some money. It's not enough to repay the whole debt, but it will help Okuchi buy things for the baby. Inky thanked her with tears in her eyes. Amaka's kindness stood in stark contrast to Ima's cruelty. But as the days passed, the situation grew more desperate. Despite their best efforts, they couldn't raise enough money. Inky tried finding work, but no one was hiring. She even considered selling her mother's only valuable possession, a gold necklace from her wedding, but her mother had already sold it years ago to pay for the twins' school fees. Then, exactly 1 week after Inky paid the hospital bill, a loud banging on their door announced the arrival of the women's contribution group. 10 women stood outside, their faces set with anger and determination. We want our money, their leader said firmly. All of it. Now, Inky stood at the doorway, her body a shield between the angry women and her family inside. Behind her, she could hear baby Ifunanya crying and Okuchi trying to comfort her. Please, Inky begged the women standing before her. We had an emergency. My sister needed surgery to save her life and her babies. We had nowhere else to turn. The leader of the women, Moneka, crossed her arms. Her face showed no sympathy. So you stole from us money that we worked hard for, money that was meant to help Adana start her business. I didn't steal it, Inky insisted. I borrowed it. I plan to replace it. With what? Another woman asked. You have no job, no husband. Your sister married a rich man who now claims she's a witch. Where would you get 300,000 naira? The women pushed past Inky into the small house. They saw Okuchi sitting on the bed, holding her crying baby. For a moment, some of their anger seemed to soften at the sight of the new mother and her child. We're sorry about your situation, Moneka said to Okuchi, but that doesn't change the fact that your sister took our money without permission. That's theft. I know, Okuchi said quietly, and we will repay every naira, I promise. Please, just give us more time. The women exchanged glances. We've already waited a week, Moneka said. Adana needs the money now. The landlord won't wait. Just 1 more week, Okuchi pleaded. I'll find work. I'll do anything. But the women had heard enough. We've been told you're spreading rumors about us, one woman said. That we plan to run away with the money. What? Inky gasped. We never said that. Your mother did, the woman insisted. She was heard in the market saying we're trying to steal from you. Is that how you repay our trust? With lies. Inky turned to look at her mother, who stood in the corner, her face unreadable. Had she really said such things? I think we've been patient enough, Moneka decided. We're going to the police. No, please, Inky cried, but it was too late. 2 of the women had already left to fetch the local police officer. Within the hour, 2 policemen arrived at the small house. They listened to the women's complaints, then turned to Inky. Is it true you took money that wasn't yours? The older officer asked. Inky couldn't lie. Yes, but it was for my sister's hospital bill. Her husband abandoned her when she needed emergency surgery. The officer's face remained stern. That's still theft. The women have filed a formal complaint. Before Inky could respond, Okuchi stood up, handing baby Ifunanya to her mother. Though still weak from her surgery, she faced the officers with dignity. It was my hospital bill, she said. If anyone should be arrested, it's me. No, Inky said firmly. I took the money. I'm responsible. The officers looked between the twin sisters, so alike in appearance, but both claiming responsibility. Finally, the older officer sighed. Inky, you'll have to come with us to the station. You can make your statement there, but unless the money is returned, you will be charged with theft. As the officers led Inky away, Okuchi watched helplessly, tears streaming down her face. Her sister was being arrested because of her, because her husband had abandoned them, because she couldn't push her baby out like Ima's mother had done. I will get you out, Okuchi promised as Inky was led away. I will find a way. After the police and the women left, the house fell silent, except for Ifunanya's occasional whimpers. Okuchi sat at the table, her mind racing. She had to find work, had to earn money, had to free her sister. I'll look after the baby, her mother said quietly. You need to rest and heal. There's no time for rest, Okuchi replied, determination hardening her voice. Inky is in jail because of me. I have to find work immediately. But you're barely recovered from your surgery, her mother protested. It doesn't matter, Okuchi said, standing up. Tomorrow, I start looking for a job. The next morning, despite her mother's concerns, Okuchi dressed carefully in her cleanest clothes. She kissed baby Ifunanya's forehead, promising to return soon, and set out to find work. The sun was hot on her back as she walked through town, stopping at every shop and business to ask for employment. But everywhere she went, people turned her away. Some had heard she was a witch who had cursed her husband's business. Others simply had no jobs to offer. By midday, Okuchi was exhausted, her surgical wound aching, but she pressed on. In the wealthy part of town, where the big houses stood surrounded by high walls, Okuchi paused. These houses often needed cleaners, cooks, or garden help. Perhaps here she would find work. At the first house, the guard wouldn't even let her through the gate. At the second, a housekeeper told her they had all the help they needed. At the third house, Okuchi was about to walk away when she noticed a sign by the gate. House help wanted. Gathering her courage, Okuchi approached the guard and explained that she was looking for work. To her surprise, he let her in and directed her to the back of the house, where a woman was supervising some gardeners. Excuse me, Okuchi said politely. I saw your sign about needing house help. I'm looking for work. The woman turned and studied Okuchi carefully. She was older, perhaps in her 50s, with a kind face that showed both authority and compassion. What's your name? The woman asked. Okuchi-ma. The woman's eyes widened slightly. Okuchi? That was my mother's name. Okuchi smiled, feeling a small spark of hope. It's not a common name. No, it isn't, the woman agreed. I'm Madame JMA. Do you have experience as house help? I kept my husband's home, Okuchi said carefully, not wanting to mention that same husband had recently abandoned her. I can clean, cook, and keep a house in order. Madame JMA seemed to sense there was more to Okuchi's story. Why are you looking for work now? You seem tired. Are you well? Something about the woman's gentle concern broke through Okuchi's carefully maintained composure. Tears filled her eyes, and though she tried to blink them away, they spilled down her cheeks. I'm sorry, she said, wiping her face quickly. I just really need this job. My sister is in trouble, and I need money to help her. Instead of turning her away, Madame Jamie led Okuchi to a bench in the garden. Sit. Tell me what's happened. Okuchi hesitated, then decided the truth was her only option. She told Madame JMA everything. The emergency surgery, Ima's abandonment, the hospital bill, Inky using the women's money, and now her sister's arrest. When she finished, Madame JMA was quiet for a long moment. How old is your baby? She asked finally. Just over a week, Okuchi admitted. And you're here, looking for work, instead of resting and healing. Madame JMA sounded incredulous. I have no choice, Okuchi said simply. My sister sacrificed her freedom for me. I must help her. Madame JMA stood up. Wait here, she said, and disappeared into the house. Okuchi sat nervously, wondering if she had said too much. Perhaps Madame JMA was calling the police to report another witch in town. Or maybe she just didn't want someone with so many problems working in her home. But when Madame JMA returned, she handed Okuchi an envelope. This should cover the debt to free your sister, she said. Consider it in advance on your salary. Okuchi stared at the envelope, unable to believe what she was hearing. You're giving me the job, and in advance. Yes to both, Madame JMA said with a smile. I travel frequently for business, and I need someone trustworthy to look after my home. My mother always said that our name connects us to people of strong character. Perhaps she was right. Tears of gratitude filled Okuchi's eyes. Thank you, Ma. I will work hard and repay your kindness. Go free your sister, Madame JMA said. Then return tomorrow with your baby. There's a small room at the back of the house where you both can stay while you work here. Okuchi couldn't believe her luck. Not only had she found a job, but also a place to live with her daughter, away from the gossip and judgment of neighbors who believed Ima's lies. She rushed to the police station, where she found Inky sitting in a cell, looking tired but unbroken. When Okuchi paid the debt in full, the women who had filed the complaint reluctantly dropped the charges, and Inky was released. As the twins walked home together, Inky kept looking at her sister in amazement. How did you do this? She asked. Where did you get the money? I found work, Okuchi explained, telling Inky about Madame JMA and her unexpected kindness. She's offering us a place to stay, too, me and Ifunanya. That's wonderful, Inky said, though her eyes showed a hint of sadness at the thought of being separated from her twin and niece. It's just until we get back on our feet, Okuchi assured her. I'll be able to save money, and soon we can find a place of our own, all of us together. When they reached home and shared the news with their mother, she looked at Okuchi with a mixture of pride and concern. Are you sure about this? Working so soon after having a baby? Living in a stranger's house? I'm sure, Okuchi said firmly. This is our chance to start over. Madame JMA seems kind, and I trust her. And most importantly, I'll be able to provide for my daughter. That night, as Okuchi packed the few things she and baby Ifunanya would need, she felt something she hadn't experienced since before Ima abandoned them. Hope. For the first time, she wasn't just a victim of circumstances, but a woman taking control of her own destiny. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of a new chapter in her life. As a provider, as a mother, as a woman who refused to be broken by abandonment and betrayal. 6 months passed, and life settled into a new rhythm for Okuchi. She worked hard at Madame JM's house, cleaning and cooking with baby Ifunanya always nearby. The little girl was growing strong, with bright eyes that seemed to take in everything around her. Sometimes, when Ifunanya smiled, Okuchi saw hints of Ima in her face, a painful reminder of the man who had abandoned them both. Madame JMA traveled often for her business, but always returned with small gifts for Ifunanya. She had become more than just an employer to Okuchi. She was a mentor and friend. Under her guidance, Okuchi learned to manage the large house and even help with some of Madame JM's business paperwork. On weekends, Inky and their mother would visit, bringing news from town. The rumors about Okuchi being a witch had mostly died down, replaced by new gossip. Ima had been seen living with another woman somewhere far away. Okuchi pretended not to care, but at night, when Ifunanya was asleep, she sometimes cried silently, wondering how the man she had loved could be so cruel. One evening, Madame JMA returned from a business trip earlier than expected. Okuchi found her sitting alone in the dark living room, her face streaked with tears. Madame, What's wrong? Okuchi asked, concerned. My mother, Madame JMS said, her voice breaking. She's gone. She died this morning. Okuchi sat beside her employer and took her hand. I'm so sorry for your loss. I need to go to the village for the funeral arrangements, Madame JMA said. I'm her only child. There's no one else to handle things. Without hesitation, Okuchi offered, I'll come with you. You shouldn't be alone at a time like this. Madame JMA looked up surprised. But what about Ifananya? She'll come too, Okuchi said firmly. We'll help you through this difficult time. The gratitude in Madame JM's eyes was all the confirmation Okuchi needed that she had made the right decision. 2 days later, they traveled to Madame JM's village. It was a small place, quiet, and far from the noise of the city. The villagers greeted Madame JMA with respect and sympathy. Her mother had been well liked, and many came to offer condolences. While Madame JMA met with elders to discuss funeral arrangements, Okuchi took Ifananya for a walk around the village. The fresh air and open spaces were a welcome change from the confines of the city. Ifananya gurgled happily, reaching for leaves and flowers as they passed. As they approached the edge of the village, Okuchi noticed a small, rundown house set apart from the others. Something about it caught her attention. A figure sat on a bench outside, head bowed, seemingly lost in thought. Okuchi froze. Despite the distance, she recognized the slumped shoulders, the familiar way the man held his head. It was Ima. Her heart pounded in her chest. What was he doing here, in this remote village? She stood rooted to the spot, unsure whether to approach or run away. Before she could decide, Ima looked up, and their eyes met across the distance. For a moment, there was no recognition in his gaze. Then his eyes widened. Amaka, he said, the name barely audible from where Okuchi stood. Confused, Okuchi stepped closer. Ifananya balanced on her hip. Ima, it's me, Okuchi. Ima stared at her blankly, then repeated, Amaka. Something was wrong. Ima's eyes looked unfocused, his clothing disheveled. This was not the proud, successful businessman she had married. The man before her seemed broken, confused. Ima, what happened to you? Okuchi asked. What are you doing here? But Ima only shook his head, repeating Amaka over and over, as if it were the only word he knew. A villager passing by paused at the scene. You know him? The elderly woman asked Okuchi. He's my husband, Okuchi admitted. But something's not right. He doesn't seem to recognize me. The old woman nodded sadly. He's been here for months. Lives alone in that house. Doesn't talk much, except to ask for someone named Amaka. A woman visits him sometimes. I assume that's her. Okuchi felt her blood run cold. Amaka? Her best friend Amaka. The same Amaka who had helped them when Ima abandoned them. What does this woman look like? Okuchi asked, her voice barely a whisper. The elderly woman thought for a moment. Older. Perhaps your mother's age. She comes every few weeks, brings him food, spends a night, then leaves. Relief flooded through Okuchi. Not her friend then. But who was this mysterious woman? Is there a church nearby? Okuchi asked suddenly. Or a pastor? The villager pointed to a small building at the center of the village. Pastor Chidi is usually there. Thanking the woman, Okuchi approached Ima cautiously. Come with me, she said gently, as if speaking to a child. I want to help you. To her surprise, Ima stood and followed her without resistance, his eyes vacant. With Ifananya on one hip and her hand guiding Ima, Okuchi made her way to the church. Pastor Chidi was a tall, thin man with kind eyes. He listened patiently as Okuchi explained who she was and how she had found Ima in this condition. He keeps saying the name Amaka, Okuchi finished. But I don't understand why. My best friend is named Amaka. But the village woman said it's an older woman who visits him. The pastor studied Ima carefully, then asked Okuchi, "May I pray for him?" The pastor studied Ima carefully, then asked Okuchi, "May I pray for him?" Okuchi nodded, and Pastor Chidi placed his hands on Ima's head, praying in a low, intense voice. As the prayer continued, Ima began to tremble, then shake. Suddenly, he cried out and collapsed to the church floor. Alarmed, Okuchi bent over him. "Ima." For a long moment, Ima lay still. Then his eyes fluttered open, and for the first time, there was recognition in them. "Okuchi?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Where am I? What happened?" Pastor Chidi helped Ima to a chair. "Your husband was under a spiritual attack," he told Okuchi gravely. "A very powerful one. Someone has been controlling his mind, his actions." "A spiritual attack?" Okuchi repeated, not understanding. "You mean like witchcraft?" The pastor nodded. "The very thing he accused you of. But it wasn't you casting spells. It was someone else. Someone using him to hurt you." Ima looked from the pastor to Okuchi, confusion and horror dawning on his face. "I remember. Pieces. Leaving you at the hospital. Saying terrible things. But it was like I was watching someone else do these things using my body." "Who would do this?" Okuchi asked, bouncing Ifunanya, who had begun to fuss. "And why?" Pastor Chidi's face was solemn. "Someone who wants to destroy your happiness. Your marriage. The spell has been broken for now, but it may not be permanent unless the person responsible is confronted." "The woman who visits him," Okuchi said slowly. "Could it be her?" "Most likely," the pastor agreed. "She probably comes to renew the spell periodically." Ima's eyes suddenly fixed on the baby in Okuchi's arms. "Is that your daughter?" Okuchi said quietly. "Ifunanya. Ifunanya," Ima repeated, tears filling his eyes. "Love." He reached out a tentative hand toward the baby, but stopped short of touching her. "After what I did, what I said, I have no right." Pastor Chidi stood. "The evil that was done through you was not of your making, but the healing must begin now. And the first step is to find out who has been controlling you and why." "How will we know?" Okuchi asked. "Return to your city," Pastor Chidi advised. "When the person responsible realizes the spell has been broken and you have found each other again, the truth will be revealed. Evil cannot hide in the light." As they left the church, Ima walked beside Okuchi, still dazed but more aware of his surroundings. He looked down at his ragged clothes and unwashed state with shame. "I don't remember coming to this village," he admitted. "The last clear memory I have is leaving the hospital, angry about the surgery. After that, everything is foggy. I remember my warehouse burning, but not how it happened. I remember someone telling me you were trying to kill me, that I had to run away. You told everyone I was a witch," Okuchi said, the pain still fresh. "You abandoned me and our newborn daughter at the hospital." Ima hung his head. "I would never do that. Not in my right mind. You have to believe me, Okuchi. Something was controlling me." Before Okuchi could respond, Madame Jam found them near the church. "Okuchi, there you are. I've been looking everywhere." She stopped short at the sight of Ima. "Who is this?" "This is Ima," Okuchi said quietly. "My husband." Madame Jm's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with suspicion. "The same husband who abandoned you and spread rumors about you being a witch." Ima flinched at her words, but didn't deny them. Okuchi quickly explained what had happened. Finding Ima in the village, his strange behavior, and Pastor Chidi's revelation about the spiritual attack. Madame Jma listened without interrupting, her face thoughtful. When Okuchi finished, she turned to Ima. "If what Pastor Chidi says is true, someone has gone to great lengths to destroy your marriage," she said. "The question is, who hates you both enough to do such a thing?" Ima shook his head helplessly. I don't know. I can't imagine anyone hating us that much. Madame J.M. looked at her watch. We should head back to the city tomorrow, after I've made the initial arrangements for my mother's funeral. I think Pastor Chidi is right. The answers you seek are not here, but back at home. That night, Okuchi couldn't sleep. She lay awake in the small guest room of Madame J.M.'s family home, Ifananya sleeping peacefully beside her. Ima had been given a place to sleep in a separate room, still too disoriented to be left alone in his rundown house. Her mind raced with questions. Who was the mysterious Amaka who visited Ima? Why would anyone want to destroy their marriage? And could she ever truly forgive Ima, even knowing he had been under someone else's control? The next morning, as they prepared to return to the city, Ima approached Okuchi timidly. He was clean now, wearing clothes borrowed from one of the villagers, but his eyes still held the haunted look of a man who had lost months of his life to someone else's evil. I want to make things right, he said softly. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want to try. For you, for Ifananya. Okuchi looked at the man she had once loved with all her heart. Behind the pain and confusion in his eyes, she could see glimpses of the Ima she had married. But trust, once broken, was not easily repaired. Let's just focus on finding out who did this to us, she said finally. We can talk about the future later. The journey back to the city was silent, each person lost in their own thoughts. Madame J.M.A. drove, with Okuchi and Ifananya in the back seat, and Ima beside her. As the village disappeared behind them, Okuchi couldn't shake the feeling that they were headed toward an even greater storm than the one they had just weathered. What evil awaited them in the city? And was she strong enough to face it? The city looked different to Ima as Madame J.M.'s car wound through the busy streets. 6 months had passed since he had last seen these buildings, these people, this life. 6 months lost to a fog he couldn't explain. He glanced at Okuchi in the back seat, cradling their daughter, a child he was only now meeting for the first time. Shame and regret washed over him. When they arrived at Madame J.M.'s house, Ima stood awkwardly in the driveway, uncertain of his place. Okuchi noticed his hesitation. You can stay here tonight, she said quietly. Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do next. Ima nodded gratefully. He had no home to return to, no warehouse, no business. Everything he had built was gone, destroyed either by fire or by his own actions while under the spell. That evening, after Ifunanya was asleep, the three adults sat at Madame J.M.'s kitchen table, trying to piece together what had happened and who might be responsible. Who would want to destroy your marriage so badly? Madame J.M.A. asked. Think carefully. Enemies, jealous friends, anyone with a grudge. Ima shook his head. I had business rivals, of course, but none who would go this far. What about your family? Madame J.M.A. asked Okuchi. Your mother? Your sister? Never, Okuchi said firmly. Inky and my mother supported me through everything. They took me in when Ima abandoned us. They helped me care for Ifunanya. And your friend Amaka? Madame J.M. pressed. The villagers said the woman who visited Ima called herself Amaka. Okuchi's eyes widened. Amaka is my best friend. She gave us money when we needed it. She's been nothing but kind. As they talked in circles, finding no clear suspect, Madame J.M. stood up. It's late, and we're all tired from the journey. Perhaps things will be clearer in the morning. I'll show Ima to the guest room. Later that night, as Okuchi lay awake listening to Ifunanya's soft breathing, a troubled thought kept returning to her mind. The woman who visited Ima was older, the villager had said, her mother's age, and she called herself Amaka. But why use her best friend's name? The next morning, Okuchi called Inky to share the startling news of finding Ima. He was under a curse? Inky asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Ima didn't abandon you willingly. That's what the pastor said, Okuchi explained. Someone has been controlling him all these months. We need to find out who. Come home, Inky urged. We can figure this out together. Okuchi explained the situation to Madame JMA, who agreed that confronting the mystery at its source was the best approach. I'll drive you, she offered. After everything you've done for me, especially coming with me to the village, it's the least I can do. The three adults and baby Ifunanya set off for Okuchi's family home. The drive was tense, each person lost in thought about what they might discover. As they neared the house, Okuchi could see something was wrong. A small crowd had gathered outside. Madame JMA parked, and Okuchi rushed out, carrying Ifunanya. Ima followed close behind. They pushed through the crowd to find Inky in tears on the front step. What's happening? Okuchi asked urgently. What's wrong? It's mother. Inky sobbed. She's gone mad. Inside the small house, they found Okuchi's mother pacing the living room, laughing wildly, her hair disheveled, her eyes unfocused. When she saw Okuchi and Ima together, she stopped suddenly. No, she shrieked. No, no, no. You found him. You weren't supposed to find him. Okuchi stepped back, clutching Ifunanya protectively. Mother, what are you saying? But the woman who had raised her only laughed harder, a hollow, frightening sound. I did it, she said, her voice suddenly dropping to a whisper. I put the spell on him. I made him leave you. I made him hate you. The room fell silent except for the woman's ragged breathing and occasional bursts of laughter. Okuchi felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath her feet. You, she whispered, you did this to us? Why? The woman's eyes narrowed, suddenly clear and focused with hatred. Because you were never supposed to be happy. Neither of you. Neither of the twins. She lurched toward them, and Ima stepped protectively in front of Okuchi and the baby. Stay back, he warned. The woman sneered at him. The spell broke. How did the spell break? It was perfect. Perfect. I've been maintaining it for months. Mother, why would you do this? Inky cried, her face wet with tears. We're your daughters. Daughters? The woman spat the word like poison. You're not my daughters. You were never my daughters. Confused, Okuchi and Inky looked at each other. What was she talking about? The woman began to pace again, talking rapidly now, as if compelled to confess everything. Your real mother was my best friend. She had everything I wanted. A loving husband, a good home, and then she was pregnant with twins. 2 babies, while my womb remained empty. She stopped, her eyes wild with old jealousy. So I put a charm in her mattress, a charm that slowly poisoned her. She died giving birth to you both, and your father was heartbroken. So heartbroken that he turned to me for comfort. Okuchi felt sick. The woman who had raised them, who they had called mother their entire lives, was actually their stepmother, and she had murdered their biological mother out of envy. I married your father, raised you as my own, the woman continued, her voice hardening. But I never loved you. How could I? You were hers. Every time I looked at you, I saw her face, her eyes. And when I found happiness with Ima, you couldn't stand it. Okuchi said quietly, understanding dawning. Just like you couldn't stand our real mother's happiness. He was too good for you, the woman shrieked. Too wealthy, too handsome. You didn't deserve him. So you cursed me, Ima said, his voice tight with anger. Made me abandon my wife while she was giving birth. Made me reject my own daughter. The woman smiled, a terrible sight. It was so easy. A simple spell in your food, and you became cold, cruel. Then a stronger one to make you leave, to make you think Okuchi was a witch trying to kill you. And you visited me in the village. Ima realized. You called yourself Amaka. I chose that name because I knew if anyone found you, they would blame Okuchi's friend Amaka. the woman said with twisted pride. I planted the seeds of doubt everywhere. I told the women's group that Inky planned to steal their money. I made sure everyone believed Okuchi was a witch. Inky stepped forward, her hands shaking. You're the one who turned the women against me. Your own daughter? You let me go to jail? You're not my daughter. The woman screamed again. Neither of you are my daughters. Madame JMA, who had been standing silently by the door, now spoke. The spell has backfired, she said with certainty. That's why she's like this now. When a curse returns to its sender, it often brings madness with it. As if to confirm Madame JM's words, the woman suddenly collapsed to the floor, still laughing, but now with tears streaming down her face. I can't stop it, she gasped. The darkness. It's coming for me now. Neighbors who had been listening from outside now rushed in to help. Someone called for a doctor. In the chaos, Okuchi, Inky, and Ima stood together, united by the terrible truth they had just learned. The woman on the floor had destroyed their lives out of jealousy and hatred. She had killed their mother, manipulated their father, and then spent years pretending to love them while secretly resenting their very existence. When Okuchi found happiness with Ima, she couldn't bear it and used dark spiritual forces to tear them apart. All these years, Inky whispered, we never knew. Okuchi looked down at Ifunanya, peacefully sleeping despite the commotion. She tried to destroy our family, just like she destroyed her best friend's family. But she failed. Ima tentatively placed his hand on Okuchi's shoulder. I'm so sorry for everything I said and did. I know it wasn't really me, but it was still my face, my voice that hurt you. Okuchi looked up at him, seeing the genuine remorse in his eyes. The road to forgiveness would be long, but at least now they knew the truth. The evil that had torn them apart had been exposed to the light. As the doctor arrived to attend to the still laughing woman on the floor, Madame JMA guided Okuchi, Ima, Inky, and baby Ifunanya outside. What happens now? Inky asked, looking lost. You rebuild, Madame JMA said firmly. Together, Okuchi looked at Ima, then at her sister, then down at her daughter. The pain of betrayal by the woman who raised them was fresh and raw, but there was also a strange sense of freedom. The curse was broken. The truth was known. Now they could begin to heal. Together, Okuchi repeated softly, we rebuild together. The weeks following their stepmother's breakdown were difficult for everyone. The woman was taken to a hospital where doctors confirmed what they already knew. Her mind was broken beyond repair. She would spend her remaining days in a facility, lost in her own madness, the victim of her own evil schemes. The truth about what she had done spread quickly through the community. People who had believed Ima's accusations against Okuchi now came forward with apologies. Those who had whispered that Okuchi was a witch now brought gifts for baby Ifunanya. The shame of how easily they had been manipulated hung over the town like a cloud. Ima stayed at Madame JM's house while he worked to rebuild his life. His warehouse was gone, his business connections severed during his months of absence. But his skills remained, and his determination to make things right gave him strength. I'll start over, he told Okuchi one evening as they sat in the garden, watching Ifunanya play on a blanket. It won't be easy, but I built my business once. I can do it again. Okuchi nodded, still cautious around him. The memory of his cruel words at the hospital lingered, even though she knew now they weren't truly his. Trust, once broken, took time to rebuild. Madame JM has offered to help, Okuchi said. She has business connections who might be interested in working with you. I'm grateful, Ima said, but I need to do this on my own. I need to prove to you, to myself, to everyone, that I can be the man you married again. Inky visited often, bringing news from their old neighborhood. Without their stepmother's evil influence, life was slowly returning to normal. The women's contribution group had even approached Inky to rejoin, ashamed of how they had treated her. I told them I'd think about it, Inky said with a small smile. It feels good to be the one with the power for a change. As weeks turned into months, the wounds began to heal. Ema found work with a trading company, earning enough to rent a small apartment nearby. Every evening after work, he would come to Madame Jama's house to spend time with Ifunanya, slowly building a relationship with his daughter. Okuchi continued working for Madame Jama, who had become like family to her. The older woman doted on Ifunanya, treating her like the grandchild she never had. You know you have a home here for as long as you need it, Madame Jama told Okuchi. Both you and Ifunanya. Thank you, Okuchi said sincerely. You saved us when we had nowhere else to turn. I'll never forget that. 1 year after the truth about their stepmother had been revealed, Ima approached Okuchi with a nervous smile. They were sitting in Madame Jama's garden, watching Ifunanya, now almost 18 months old, toddle among the flowers. I've been saving, Ima said. I found a small house not far from here. It's nothing like our old place, but it's clean and safe. I was hoping. I was hoping you and Ifunanya might consider moving in with me as a family again. Okuchi looked at him thoughtfully. The past year had shown her a different side of Ima, humble, hardworking, patient. Every day he had proven his devotion to their daughter. Every day he had respected Okuchi's need for space and time. Are you asking me to try our marriage again? She asked quietly. Ima nodded. I know I don't deserve it. After everything that happened, even if it wasn't really me, it was still my face, my voice that hurt you. That I love you, Okuchi. I never stopped loving you, even when the curse made me believe the worst about you. Okuchi watched Ifunanya pick up a flower and bring it to Madame Jama, who was sitting nearby. The older woman accepted it with a delighted smile. This was what family should be. Loving, supportive, kind. I think, Okuchi said slowly, that we could try. Not for the past, but for the future. For Ifunanya. For all of us, Ima said, taking her hand gently. One day at a time. Inky, who had been listening nearby, came over with a smile. Does this mean I get my sister back as a neighbor? You never lost me, Okuchi said, embracing her twin. No evil spell could ever break our bond. That evening, they shared the news with Madame Jama, who reacted with mixed joy and sadness. I'm happy for you, she said sincerely, but I'll miss having you and Ifunanya here. We won't be far, Okuchi promised, and you'll always be part of our family. The day Okuchi and Ifunanya moved into the small house with Ima was both an ending and a beginning. As they unpacked their few belongings, Okuchi felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. The house was modest but well kept. Ima had painted the walls himself and bought a small bed for Ifunanya with colorful sheets. There were flowers in vases and food in the kitchen. It wasn't wealth, but it was home. That night, after Ifunanya was asleep in her new room, Okuchi and Ima sat on their small porch, looking up at the stars. Do you ever think about her? Ima asked. Your stepmother? Okuchi nodded. Sometimes. Not with anger anymore, but with pity. She wasted her whole life on hatred and jealousy. She raised us, but never allowed herself to love us. What a lonely existence. The curse she meant for us destroyed her instead. Ima reflected. There's a lesson in that. Yes, Okuchi agreed. Evil always returns to its source eventually. Nothing stays hidden forever. As the years passed, their small family grew stronger. Ima's business slowly expanded again, built on honest work and integrity. Okuchi eventually opened a small shop selling fabrics, using skills she had learned from Madame Jama. Ifunanya grew into a bright, loving child who brought joy to everyone around her. Inky found love with a kind man from a neighboring town, and when they married, Okuchi stood proudly as her twin's maid of honor. The bond between the sisters remained unbreakable, strengthened by all they had endured together. Madame Jma continued to be a guiding presence in their lives, offering wisdom and support whenever needed. She often said that meeting Okuchi had been one of the greatest blessings of her life, a sentiment Okuchi returned wholeheartedly. The woman who had tried to destroy them remained in the hospital, lost in her own dark world. Occasionally, Okuchi would visit, though her stepmother never recognized her. It was not out of obligation that she went, but out of compassion, a quality her stepmother had never shown, but one Okuchi refused to lose. 5 years after they had rebuilt their marriage, Okuchi gave birth to a son. As she held the newborn in her arms, with Ima and Ifunanya beside her, she felt a circle being completed. This time, there was no rejection, no cruelty, only love. What should we name him? Ima asked, gently touching his son's tiny hand. Okuchi smiled. Chidi, she said. It means God exists. Because after everything we've been through, I believe that good is stronger than evil, that love is more powerful than hate. Ima nodded, understanding. Chidi it is. As their family grew and prospered, Okuchi often thought about the lessons their journey had taught them, that evil may have its moment, but truth always finds the light, that forgiveness is a choice that must be made again and again, that family is not always defined by blood, but by love and loyalty. Most importantly, they had learned that no curse, no spell, no evil intention could destroy what was meant to be, as long as they held fast to one another, trusted in goodness, and chose love over bitterness. Nothing remains hidden under the sun. Okuchi would tell her children as they grew. Be honest, be kind, be hardworking, and remember that every action, good or bad, eventually returns to its source. It was a lesson paid for dearly, but one worth passing on, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring power of forgiveness and love.